You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hello, Jack.
Hey, welcome in, Len. You look great.
Thank you. So do you.
How are things going there?
Very well. Very well indeed. I'm beginning to harvest a lot of vegetables from my small greenhouse that I built about 20 years ago.
Oh, you've got a greenhouse that you built?
Yes. It's not big, but it produces more than I can handle, along with my children, who I usually share these things with. But now I share them with neighbors because my children are not coming up here anymore, and we meet only by telephone or by video.
Well, they're sensitive to the quarantine, right?
They are, definitely, yes.
And you're sensitive to it too. You've got a whole regimen you've described online about that.
Oh, yes. I adhere to all of the common sense regs. And in addition to that, as a doctorate in medical microbiology, I have more information than most people. And I also have access to my old laboratory ultraviolet lamp that I use to sterilize various items from time to time.
I bet you never thought you'd be using it as much as you're using now.
No, I didn't. I had stored it, and it was difficult to find, and I finally did locate it.
You got to hope that the bulb doesn't burn out. Maybe there's not even a replacement available, right?
Well, there is, and I could, if that happens, I could obtain one online.
Well, you caused me to go out and buy one, and now we are doing UV light over packaging. But I tell you, it's the first time I've ever had to do that.
Well, I don't know whether the item that you bought contained the things to do and not to do. It's critically important that you never look at that UV lamp.
Right.
Or any reflective surface that reflects that radiation.
So let's focus on what's going on right now. There's a big worry that everyone's getting back to work. It hasn't really happened here in Silicon Valley yet. And most companies, including Apple Computer, have not reopened their stores or their offices. But in various states, and I sent you that last news report from the Washington Post about how 5 states are reporting big surges, and Texas has reclosed down. I don't know if Florida is going to reclose down, but I'm kind of curious. Do you think we're at the beginning of what might be a COVID 2020? Essentially the 2020 version of COVID-19, or will it just stay COVID-19?
Well, we're in COVID 2020 right now.
Right, it originated as COVID-19 though, right?
Well, yeah, technically it did. That's the reason the 19 is attached to the name, right. Which is traditionally how virus outbreaks are named by the year in which they were discovered, but it has no meaning in respect to the numbers of victims that occurred in 2019, which were essentially trivial compared to what we're seeing today.
Right, and it looks like it's growing now, at least in 5 states. So I don't know if you would say that's just a natural outcome of the reopening, or you would say something else might be going on.
No, I think that this is simply there has not been a resurgence because the original outbreak is still going on, in my judgment. Of course, that's pretty much of a judgment determination, and is not borne out by any specific definition of terms. But the recent upsurge in various parts of this country are simply due to the failure to obey the simple-minded principles that everyone should be observing. And it's a casualty of human ignorance and human unwillingness to abide by the rules, including the leadership of this country, which is part of the problem.
Well, part of the problem is the leadership wants to get reelected, and they don't think they could possibly get reelected without actually doing something to reopen the economy. And so it's a catch-22. You reopen the economy, but you're not going to get reelected if the virus goes wild as a result of people coming in contact with each other. So it's sort of like he's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. I don't know what he should do at this point. It seems like saving human lives would be the big priority if you wanted to be a human being about it, right?
Well, yes. A cynical view would be, first of all, there is good reason to believe that the people who are in our leadership and demonstrating on video their refusal themselves to abide by the rules are the basis, I think, for charges of murder.
Wow.
Yes, I agree. The response is a wow. But that's what is happening. They are providing conditions for people to acquire this disease, the result of which for some people who acquire the disease to eventually die.
Yeah, you would say it's reckless homicide. There's a form of reckless homicide.
If that's a better definition, then yes.
Well, it's beyond negligence. You're saying this is beyond negligence because it's so obvious, right?
Of course it's beyond negligence. It's being done consciously and openly and with certainty. And if you listen to our vice president this morning in respect to his summary of what has been done in the past and what's planned in the future, you will realize how ignorant these people are of simple logic and facts. I've rarely heard, although I probably should take that back, I think it's pretty common, that this vice president, and he's not alone in this regard in respect to the opinions of many non-experts on this outbreak and their political concerns, is their constant spewing out of what I would rather define as equestrian fecal matter.
And you would think they have the best advisors around them. And of course, Fauci and a group of others do contradict what Trump and Pence say. And it seems like they still get along with each other.
Well, if you saw the session this morning in which the president did not appear, the vice president did, and what he said could not be more unintelligible in respect to the lack of reason, the lack of confronting the facts, and the wiggling that he did in respect to what the facts are and what his interpretation of them are in defense of the president and of the upcoming election. That's all that he was interested in.
So Pence is essentially playing the line to try to get reelected, which kind of implies that he will be the vice president in any such reelection. Some people question whether Trump might try to replace him with a woman or maybe even with a black woman to sort of go up against Joe Biden's choice, which has very much been to find the right black woman. He's got about a half dozen that he's interviewing with a view of trying to get the black vote, which is viewed as pretty important in this election for a variety of reasons.
Well, of course, everything that the president and vice president are doing these days is directed solely to promoting themselves for reelection. Whether the president decides to dump the vice president or not is questionable. I greatly doubt that will happen. It's too late in the game for him to find somebody.
I think what you're talking about in terms of Pence was his statement this morning, maybe 4 or 5 hours ago, that there's been, quote, remarkable progress as COVID-19 cases actually have hit a new record, but he's saying there's been truly remarkable progress, which is kind of like doublespeak, right?
Yes, I mean, the adjectives remarkable and fantastic and unbelievable, that's 50% of the vocabulary of Trump and Pence when they describe anything that they think will help them get reelected.
And I think your point, and I'm going to make it graphical here, The Guardian is playing this to the UK audience, but it's really now to basically everyone. Here's Fauci with the mask on. I'm just sharing my screen here. I don't know if you see this. Do you see this?
No, I don't. But if you're talking about the events this morning, I did see Fauci.
Yeah, Fauci is there with his arms folded and the mask on. And here's Pence basically spouting a bunch of double talk. That's your point, right?
Exactly.
And what you would say is that is really like a form of reckless homicide. And of course, there are people commenting saying, this is what's going on here is wrong. This is The Guardian that publishes in the UK. They really caught the picture here. Interestingly, Mike Pence speaks at Friday's press briefing while Dr. Anthony Fauci watches. Pence did not wear a mask at the news conference. Here's the storyline. Then there's probably a video behind it, but we don't really have time to show it.
Well, in support of the belief that these two leaders are reckless murderers, or however else you wish to characterize them in that sense, is the probability that they are going to do even more harm in their scheduled upcoming gatherings with their supporters, wherein they and their supporters will not be, they in particular will not be wearing masks or staying 6 feet apart, and their supporters largely will not be doing that either.
Right.
Yet their call for an assemblage of people who are not abiding by the simple rules that we all understand is the basis for the continuing of these outbreaks all over the country.
Right. And people don't realize that it's not just their personal choice, because they are actually transmitting disease to others. So, we're all in this together, and you can't just make a choice that says, I don't like wearing a mask, because you're affecting other people. We're all sharing kind of the same ecosystem, as it were.
Yes. Well, I may be wrong about my observation, because it is possible I could have missed it. But when Pence this morning was describing what people should be doing or not doing in respect to these outbreaks, is that he never mentioned the word mask.
Right.
I would like somebody to check that.
Yes.
And if he did, it may have been once in the 3/4 of an hour, I think, that he spoke. And
right, but it's symbolic that he wasn't wearing a mask or even trying to wear a mask as people pull the mask down. Masks come down as they speak. Obviously, you have to eat, so you have to be unmasked when you eat. There actually are people that are wearing these visors now that go over their face, and they can actually talk and eat with the visor kind of in front of them, like a motorcycle visor almost.
Well, at least he should have had the common sense to wear the mask around his neck.
Yes,
as
right.
Many people do when they're speaking and
right.
are 6 feet away from other persons.
Right, exactly.
Because that would be a signal that he's responding to common sense.
I just have a couple of minutes to wrap up. It seems to me that we may see this be a very long, hot summer where the cases actually go even more exponential. And maybe by the time this is over, if it ever does get over, we're going to have over 1 million deaths worldwide, which is probably on par with what happened in 1918. And maybe 1918 was even greater. I haven't looked at those numbers. I know there was 3 sets of graphs we looked at the last time.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that the number of deaths is going to continue to climb. But one of the serious problems in respect to this death is the basis for a lot of the discussions that are going on and the hype around that and other subjects is that the causes of death in many, if not most cases, is not determined scientifically.
Right.
The causes of death are based on the subjective beliefs of the medical personnel who are making that determination and writing it on a death certificate.
Right.
Even deaths attributable prior to this outbreak to the leading causes of death, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and stroke, for example, those causes written on death certificates are highly suspect. A number of years ago, I did an analysis of the only 3 places in the world where there were a sufficient number of autopsies done to come to some statistical conclusions, because autopsies, the frequency of autopsies has been rapidly declining for the past many decades. It was found in these 3 situations that I looked at that about 40% of the causes of death written on the death certificates were wrong as determined by subsequent autopsy.
That's a big number. That's
It's
a really
huge
big number.
Yet national health policy and other policies are based on an error rate, on data with an error rate of 40%.
That's very pathetic.
And that is alarming.
It's alarming. Yeah, I agree with you.
And the problem is that, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, the determination of Alzheimer's disease scientifically can only be done at autopsy. And the cost of doing an autopsy is very high. It is not done by families usually because they have no interest other than what they have read on a death certificate.
Right.
And scientifically, there's very little interest in doing autopsies, again, because of the cost to the investigators, so that the cause of death for people who die over the age of 80, let's say arbitrarily, is a black box.
Right.
And that applies substantially to what's going on today in respect to causes of death attributable to COVID-19. I have very little respect for these numbers called causes of death because they could be confused with ordinary influenza, and also they're based on testing about which I have a great deal of disbelief, because even the tests that are being used today have not been themselves tested as had to be done under law in former years by the FDA. The tests were, the politicians were so anxious to get the tests out and being used that the FDA only requires recommendations in respect to the safety, specificity, reproducibility of these tests. And I am certain, because there are now several examples of manufacturers of these tests who have used their own recommendations for those significant requirements. And I don't have to tell you how those are compromised in order to make money.
So do you think we're ever going to get this right? Because to me, this is an area where there should be immense improvement of the data collection. And without improving it, health policy is not going to improve itself. That there should be a major renovation of the way in which this data is collected. Is that just impossible to imagine?
I think it's virtually impossible to imagine the momentum that exists right now. We're doing tests regardless of whether they're accurate or not, or safe, or what they're measuring, or how reproducible they are. The momentum behind that is so great now that it will take months, if not years, to make corrections. Furthermore, if it is discovered that some or one or more of these tests is not qualified in the way I described, then the red faces of the politicians and the talking heads who believe this data would be enormous.
Well, I think we have a lot of information here to hopefully pass on. I imagine someday I'm going to be able to actually send these comments in some compressed, edited form directly to Joe Biden if he makes it as president, and or directly to Donald Trump if he remains as president, with the view that this is some of the best thinking on planet Earth of what things should be improved over time for the benefit of the United States and really for the benefit of the whole world.
Well, all that people have to do is look at the first paragraph of a public document available from the FDA called Recommendations for the Testing of Materials Used in the COVID-19 epidemic. And there they will find that they're only recommendations.
Well, thanks, Len, for coming on. I appreciate it. We will hopefully pick this up next Friday at 3 p.m. If you have time to do it, I'll send you a reminder, and we'll go from there and look at the statistics together this week. Hopefully we'll have a better July 4th than the way it seems to be playing out, but right now it doesn't look very good. I agree with you.
No, it doesn't, Jack, unfortunately.
All right, you stay healthy. You're looking good.
Thank you very much.
Those vegetables, I envy you. You're getting fresh vegetables right from your own garden and greenhouse right to table.
That's
so
right.
You're a model for all of us.
I'm going to have a huge salad tonight of various lettuce varieties, spinach, spring onions, and my tomatoes haven't arrived yet, but they will in a couple of weeks.
Nice. Well, I hope at some point I get to taste all that sometime later this year. You take care.
You too,
Bye-bye.
Ken.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.